Number 15. Angel and Yako Breitenbach. Before letting their pets outside one morning in early 2021, South African couple Angel and Yako Breitenbach checked their home security cameras. They were shocked to discover a massive crocodile taking a dip in their backyard pool outside of their residence in the country's northwest province. Knowing they were unqualified to remove the giant reptile on their own, the pair contacted the authorities. A team from the non-profit Wild Heart Wildlife Foundation was summoned to the scene, where they tied the crocodile's jaws shut for their safety and got to work pulling it out of the pool. The creature thrashed around and tried to escape, but the team managed to get it under control. In a Facebook post, the non-profit noted that numerous crocodiles had recently been displaced from their everyday habitats due to heavy rains from Cyclone Eloise. The animal that ended up in the Breitenbach's pool most likely came from a nearby river. After undergoing an examination by the Department of Nature Conservation, it was released back into its natural environment. Number 14. Andrew Munier. Florida resident Andrew Munier went to take his Pomeranians outside late one night in 2018 and was taken aback when one of his dogs growled and ran back inside just moments after stepping out the door. Wanting to know what startled the dog, Munier went back outside. Just a few feet from the door were 3 black bears, which Munier tried to avoid. But he didn't even get a chance to turn around before one of the bears slashed at him with his paw, leaving an 8-inch gash across his face along with several smaller cuts. Munier spent 4 hours in the emergency room, where he received 41 stitches to close up his injuries. He spent the next 2 nights recovering at his ex-wife's house, then returned home to find what looked like a murder scene in his house. There was blood everywhere, serving as a sobering reminder that he had just become the first person to be attacked by a bear in South Florida in at least 40 years. The incident marked the 15th bear attack in the state since 1976. Speaking with the Naples Daily News, Munier said that his injuries no longer hurt, but that he would probably be scared whenever he took his dogs outside for a while. In the days following the accident, he was easily startled by small things like a rabbit moving along the backyard. But he knew that the outcome could have been much worse, and above all, said that he was happy to be alive. Number 13. Haley Morino. When 17-year-old Haley Morino's 5 dogs started barking and ran out into her backyard in Britain last year, she went to see what all the fuss was about. She noticed a mother bear and her 2 cubs walking along a wall that surrounds the yard. Without second thought, Morino ran outside and shoved the bear in an attempt to protect her dogs. While black bears aren't usually aggressive, it's another story when it comes to a mother protecting her cubs, and the bear that entered Haley's backyard was snapping at her dogs. The teenager scrambled to grab her dog Valentina away from the bear and to get her other pets inside. Luckily, she was only left with a sprained finger and some scrapes, and Valentina also only had minor injuries. Footage of the split-second rescue went viral, landing Haley and her mother an interview on Good Morning Britain. She said that she reacted so fast to the sight of the bear threatening her dogs that it did not register in her mind that she herself was in real danger until after she pushed the bear. While she's lucky the outcome wasn't worse, her quick thinking most likely saved her dogs' lives. Number 12. Colin Kadachi. In February 2021, a brutal winter storm struck Texas, killing nearly 250 people across 77 counties. Shortly after the storm, 78-year-old Montrose landlord Colin Kadachi was reported missing by his family. At the time of his disappearance, Kadachi was living in the upper unit of a 2-story home that he owned. One of the first-floor tenants, Michael Brown, allegedly told detectives that he hadn't seen Kadachi in 9 days. Another tenant living in the same unit reportedly claimed that he had recently returned home from a trip to find Brown's girlfriend, 34-year-old Pamela Ann Merritt, living in the apartment and refusing to leave. When he mentioned that he was going to address the issue with the landlord, Merritt allegedly said she had killed Kadachi. Investigators found no body on the property, so they took Merritt to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, and Kadachi remained missing. 5 months later, a new tenant called the police to report several suspicious items that he had found on the property, including drops and pools of blood throughout the apartment, a knife in the mailbox, and a bloody bin inside a crawl space. The woman told officers that she was renting from Merritt and Brown, who had offered her a rent discount in exchange for cleaning the home's upper floors. When she questioned her new landlords about the blood, they allegedly claimed that Kadachi had died at a local hospital after falling and accidentally piercing himself with a sharp object. But Kadachi still remained missing, and with no body, detectives had little to go on in the way of figuring out what really happened. 2 months later, in December 2021, the new tenant called the police again and said that she had overheard Merritt and Brown talking about a dead dog beneath a staircase in the backyard of the home. The woman later claimed that when she asked the couple if she could see the dog, Merritt showed her the location of the body, which she could immediately tell was a human corpse. Police retrieved the decomposing remains, which were identified as belonging to Kadachi, and the medical examiner ruled that he had died from sharp force and blunt force injuries to his torso. During questioning, Merritt allegedly tried to convince detectives that the remains belonged to a dog and that Kadachi was alive and well, and had faked his death and fled to Africa. Brown, on the other hand, claimed that Kadachi had just disappeared one day and urged investigators to pay no mind to Merritt, who he claimed was bipolar and essentially talking nonsense. Both Merritt and Brown initially avoided criminal charges. Finally, in May 2023, authorities issued a warrant for Merritt's arrest in connection with Kadachi's death. By then, she was no longer living at the address where Kadachi's body was found. Police finally located her 3 months later, and she remains behind bars at the Harris County Jail on a $500,000 bond while awaiting the outcome of her case. Number 11. Colby Richards. A Texas family's lives were thrown into a tailspin early one morning in May of 2023, when 31-year-old father of two Colby Richards woke up at 5 a.m. to get ready for work, but instead exited his house in Spring and didn't return. His wife Callie realized something was wrong when she looked in their backyard and saw that the gate was open, which was highly unusual. This, along with the fact that Colby left his keys and cell phone behind, suggested that he had left the property on foot. His disappearance was out of character enough to quickly spark a large manhunt, with law enforcement and teams of volunteers scouring the area in search of the missing man. Police found a water bottle belonging to Colby at a trailhead leading to a wooded area behind the family's home, but Colby himself was nowhere to be found. And while he liked to occasionally take walks in the wilderness, it was not something that he would do in the morning before work. 8 days after his disappearance, Colby was found safe near an intersection just miles from his home, in an upscale commercial district known as the Woodlands. Little is known about what happened between the time he vanished and when he was found, but news reports stated that Colby had wandered into the affluent area. He was coherent but dizzy and in a depleted state, according to Jake Stovall, who led one of the searches for the missing husband and father. Speaking with the Daily Mail, Stovall said that it appeared as though Colby didn't want to be found and that he was hiding and seemed confused. He was taken to a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, and the family has remained private about the details behind his seemingly willful disappearance, which authorities suspect may have occurred in the throes of a mental health crisis. Number 10. Post-football game fatalities. On January 7, 2024, 36-year-old Clayton McGeeney, 38-year-old Ricky Johnson, and 37-year-old David Harrington went to the Kansas City home of Jordan Willis to watch the Chiefs football game against the Los Angeles Chargers. The three men never made it home, prompting their concerned loved ones to start looking for them. 2 days after the game, 2 of the men's bodies were found in Willis's backyard, while the third was found on his back porch. They appear to have frozen to death, but according to the most recent updates on the case, investigators were still awaiting the results of an autopsy and a toxicology test. Willis is maintaining his innocence, initially claiming through his lawyer that he last saw his friends as they left the house right before he went to bed. He later changed his story and said that he went to bed while his friends were still hanging out at the residence, claiming he didn't know how or when his friends left, and that he didn't know anyone was looking for them until the police contacted him. A Kansas City spokesperson revealed that no signs of foul play were found at the scene. No arrests have been made in the case, which is currently classified as a death investigation. When approached by law enforcement, Willis consented to a search of his home and cooperated with investigators, who questioned him about whether he found it odd that his friends' cars were still parked outside along his street the day after the game. He said that it was normal for his friends to just leave their cars overnight after a visit, and according to his attorney, he's just as eager as anyone else for police to get to the bottom of the case. Willis claims to be deeply saddened by the loss of his friends, who he knew for over 20 years leading up to their deaths. He has since moved out of the rental property and is looking forward to finding out what caused the tragedy. As bits and pieces of new information come to light, the victims' families are growing increasingly frustrated. 2 weeks after the discovery of the bodies, Willis revealed through his lawyer that there were actually 4 visitors at his house when he went to bed. This new detail, along with Willis's changing story about whether or not he actually saw the men leave the house, have left the victims' loved ones feeling as though they are not being given the full story and are skeptical about whether Willis is telling the truth. They also find it odd that Willis did not hear one of the men's fiancés scream upon discovering his body, yet he came to the door when police came knocking a little while later. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 9. Valerie Tindle. Sheena Sandifer and Jack Tindle of Arlington, Indiana, experienced a parent's worst nightmare in June of 2023 when their teenage daughter Valerie Tindle went missing. They never suspected that someone they knew could be involved in her disappearance, so they were understandably shocked when Valerie's body was found buried in their neighbor Patrick Scott's backyard in late November. According to court documents, Scott initially denied any involvement in the disappearance of the young woman, who had worked for his lawn mowing business for 2 years. Following the discovery of Valerie's remains, the 59-year-old confessed to killing her. He allegedly claimed that he became angry when Valerie came onto him and reacted by strangling her with his belt. Scott then carried on his day like normal, leaving her body in his home office. The following day, he wrapped Valerie's remains in plastic and buried her in a homemade wooden box. Speaking with Fox 59, Valerie's parents accused Scott of displaying zero remorse as he recounted the details of the young woman's death. He remains in custody without bail on a murder charge while awaiting his next court date in the ongoing case. Number 8. Joe Taricone. In 2007, construction workers discovered mutilated human remains in a plastic bag while excavating a residential property in Puyallup, Washington. Law enforcement interviewed the homeowner, who remembered that a young woman named Gypsy Taricone had come by in 1990 with questions about her father, Joe Taricone, a traveling meat salesman who had gone missing in 1978. When none of Joe's 7 children had heard from him by March of 1979, the family filed a missing persons report. Investigators had traced Joe's last known location to the home in Puyallup, which belonged to the mother of his girlfriend at the time, Renee Curtis. Joe had started dating Renee, who worked as a secretary for his meat company during the early 1970s. He was last seen visiting Renee's mother in September 1978. After the remains found in 2007 were confirmed to belong to Joe Taricone, law enforcement interviewed Renee's then 60-year-old brother, Nicholas Notaro, who admitted to fatally shooting Joe for being abusive toward his sister. Nicholas denied that Renee had any involvement in the crime, which he claimed he carried out with the assistance of his now-deceased mother. He told investigators that he kept Joe's body in a freezer prior to dismembering him and burying him in the backyard. Based on Joe's body size, law enforcement found it unlikely that Nicholas's elderly mother would have been capable of assisting in the disposal of the victim's remains. Under pressure from detectives, Renee admitted to helping Nicholas dismember Joe's body. After getting away with their crime for nearly 30 years, both she and Nicholas were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Number 7. Carlos Henrique Medeiros. When 26-year-old Brazilian YouTuber Carlos Henrique Medeiros failed to return home after going out on Christmas Eve in 2023, his family contacted the friends he had visited for dinner, who said he left their home at around 2 o'clock in the morning. Carlos had initially planned to have dinner with his sister that evening, but he changed his plans at the last minute and instead visited his friends who lived in the Itapecerica da Serra region of Greater Sao Paulo. Before contacting the police, the young man's concerned family members searched the property themselves. They instantly noticed a mound of dirt in the yard, which they cleared away until Carlos's t-shirt became visible. Police took over from there and were quick to arrest the couple who lived at the home, 28-year-old Renan Jose and 24-year-old Caroline Mello. According to investigators, the pair claimed that Carlos died during a drug-fueled romp with Caroline's sister and that they buried his body because they did not know what to do with it. The suspect said that Carlos must have overdosed and implied that he had a heart attack right as the intimacy reached its peak level of excitement. It's hard to understand why someone would bury a person's body instead of notifying authorities in a situation like that, but so far investigators have found no evidence of foul play, indicating that Renan and Caroline might actually be telling the truth about what happened. As of January 2024, authorities were waiting on autopsy results to determine whether Carlos was murdered. If his cause of death is ruled as a homicide, the couple will face charges accordingly. And if his death is ruled non-suspicious, they will be charged with concealing a corpse. Number 6. David Jackson. In 1989, a construction crew was tasked with cleaning up the backyard of an old farmhouse in Miramar, Florida, in anticipation of a new Walmart store that would soon be built on the site. While carrying out the routine work, they discovered what looked like human finger bones buried in a shallow grave and covered by an overgrown watermelon plant. Knowing the property had previously functioned as a chicken farm, the boss overseeing the site initially assumed the bones belonged to chickens. But the workers knew what they were seeing, so they called the police, who proceeded to dig up the remainder of what turned out to be an adult male skeleton. At the time, DNA testing was in its infancy. Using it to identify the body was out of the question, and authorities were unable to identify the remains using other investigative techniques. The bones were labeled as John Doe, placed in a box, and shelved for the next 14 years. Law enforcement finally put 2 and 2 together in 2003, when Pembroke Pines detective Donna Velasquez was tasked with investigating the cold missing persons case of 24-year-old David Jackson, who had gone missing in 1988. The most recent tip had come roughly 6 weeks after David's disappearance, when his car was found in the parking lot of the Fort Lauderdale airport. It contained no useful evidence and had been wiped clean of fingerprints, landing investigators at a dead end in their efforts to locate the missing father of one. At the time of his disappearance, David was entangled in an acrimonious child custody battle with his ex-wife, Barbara Britton, who had remarried right after their divorce and moved across the country with their son. After already losing his marriage to a woman he loved deeply, David was not about to surrender his rights as a father. He fought in court to maintain access to his son, so when he disappeared, it was only natural for detectives to turn their attention toward Barbara and her new husband. But without a body or any other evidence to implicate the couple or anyone else in the crime, years passed without any knowledge of what happened to David or who was responsible for it. Thanks to keen-eyed detective Velasquez, the Walmart skeleton was finally identified as David Jackson after she inherited the case in 2003. A closer look into Barbara's second marriage revealed that her new husband had adopted her and David's son John just months after David went missing, causing Velasquez to suspect that Barbara knew David was gone forever by that point. By the time David's bones were identified, Barbara and her second husband Michael Wolf had divorced. Suspecting they could get him to crack under pressure, investigators interviewed Wolf, who denied any involvement in David's death and tried to implicate his former father-in-law in the crime. When he refused to open up more about what he knew, detectives called up one of his 7 ex-wives, Nancy Graham, who had married him after his divorce from Barbara. Much to their surprise, Nancy told law enforcement that she'd been waiting for their call for 10 years. She said that Michael had drunkenly confessed to killing David one evening, and the information she provided was enough for authorities to charge him with murder. After deliberating for less than an hour, the jury found Michael guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. Following his sentencing, Michael finally admitted to being involved in David's murder, but he claimed he did not act alone and that Barbara had lured him to a motel room under the guise of wanting to talk about rekindling their relationship. David took the bait and was ambushed and shot by Michael after entering the room. Michael claimed that Barbara and her father Harry masterminded the plot so they could gain full custody of Barbara and David's son without having to fight for it in court. Barbara admitted to luring David to the motel, but denied participating in his murder. She was convicted of a lesser charge of accessory after the fact and served 2 years of house arrest, followed by 8 years of probation, avoiding prison time altogether. By the time the crime was solved, Barbara's father Harry had passed away, which meant that if he truly was involved like Michael claimed, he got away with murder. But at least some measure of long overdue justice was served for David's family, who had never stopped looking for him after he mysteriously went silent so many years earlier. Number 5. Shawn Bear. In most US states, people are allowed to bury their loved ones on their own property, as long as they obtain a death certificate and any required permits. But it's generally illegal to simply lay someone to rest without acquiring the proper documents, which is a lesson that a 32-year-old Vermont man named Shawn Bear learned the hard way during the summer of 2023. According to authorities, Shawn's sister called the police in August and reported that her brother had admitted to burying their 65-year-old father, Timothy Bear, in the backyard of their Richford home. Shawn allegedly told his sister that their father had died of natural causes, and it appears as though he was telling the truth when police visited the property and located Timothy's remains in a shallow grave. During questioning, Shawn revealed that his father had suffered from numerous health problems, including colon cancer and COPD. And while investigators would have to wait for autopsy results to know for sure, they did not suspect that foul play was involved. But there were still things wrong with the situation, including the fact that Timothy's body had allegedly started to decompose before Shawn buried him. According to an affidavit, responding officers found the home in disarray, with feces and evidence of decomposition present indoors. Shawn has pleaded not guilty to a misdemeanor charge for unauthorized burial or removal of a body, and his case appears to be ongoing. While his reasons for not calling 911 or a funeral home to report his father's death are unclear, local funeral home director Adam Goss told news station WIFR that cost would have most likely been a factor in a family's decision to bury a loved one themselves. But there are programs to help people who cannot afford a loved one's burial, and in the event they still choose to do the burial themselves, there are rules and protocols that must be followed. Number 4. Michael Shaver. After graduating, high school sweethearts Michael and Lori Shaver married and settled down together in Claremont, Florida. By all accounts, they lived a typical middle-class existence, with Michael supporting the family by working as a monorail technician at Disney World. In early 2018, a friend contacted the Lake County Sheriff's Office with concerns about Michael, who they had only communicated with over text message since sometime in 2015. For over 2 years, the friend had not seen Michael in person or even received a phone call from him, eventually causing them to become worried enough to contact law enforcement. Sheriff's deputies paid a visit to Michael's home, where Lori gave them permission to come inside and look around. She claimed she had not heard from Michael since November 2015, when he quit his job via email, turned his back on his family, and left for a new life with a new woman. Lori, who had remarried in 2016 and now goes by the last name Fulmer, said she had no idea where Michael was, but she became less accommodating to the deputies' questions when they asked if they could search the property with cadaver dogs. She refused to allow them to search without a warrant, so they obtained one and returned less than a month later with a team of cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. They found Michael's body buried 3 feet underground beneath a concrete fire pit in the backyard. An autopsy found that Michael had been shot once in the back of the head, several months to several years before the discovery of his body. 2 years later, following a lengthy investigation, authorities charged Lori with second-degree murder. Adding a macabre twist to the situation, Lori allegedly married her current husband in a backyard ceremony in 2016, just inches away from where Michael was buried. Laurie has adamantly maintained her innocence throughout the case. In a YouTube video appealing to members of the public for donations toward her defense, she described herself as loving, caring, and non-judgmental person who would never harm the father of her children. But not everyone sees her that way. According to court documents, a friend of Michael's described Laurie as a jealous and evil person who had attacked Michael more than once in the past. The paperwork further stated that Michael was never reported missing because his social media and phone remained active, making it seem as though he was alive and well. In an affidavit, authorities accused Laurie of draining Michael's bank account in the weeks following his suspected death date. She also allegedly sold off a number of his prized belongings. Nearly 4 years after Laurie's arrest, the case continues to drag its heels through the court system. In a motion filed by her defense team in May of 2023, Laurie claimed that her daughter, who is now a teenager, has confessed to murdering Michael. The young woman is reportedly standing by the story put forth by Laurie's defense team, even after being warned that she could face criminal charges. For now, the case against Laurie stands and is slated to go to trial in late 2024. Number 3. Mary Aruri. While building a backyard deck outside a vacant home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that was undergoing renovations in early 2018, a team of workers discovered a human skeleton buried beneath a concrete slab. Investigators traced their biggest lead back to the early 1960s, when the home was owned by a married couple named Mary and Albert Aruri. In the fall of 1964, Albert told relatives that Mary had left him and their children. Nobody notified the police of Mary's disappearance, and a missing persons report was never filed. Albert died less than a year later when his vehicle crashed into a local car dealership. It would later be concluded that he had ample time to avoid hitting the building, and that he most likely rammed his vehicle into it on purpose. The house was sold at auction in 1966 without any investigation being carried out into Mary's disappearance. In early 2019, DNA testing confirmed that the bones found behind the house belonged to Mary. Her cause and manner of death were listed as undetermined. Retired Pittsburgh Police Assistant Chief Therese Rocco, who knew the Arkuris personally and was the godmother to their daughter, told the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review that she initially believed Albert's story about Mary packing her clothes and skipping town. At the time, there were rumors about Mary having an affair, making it seem plausible that she would abandon her life and start over elsewhere. But Rocco knew that Mary was a good mother and found it hard to believe that she would deliberately vanish without staying in contact with her kids. Rocco also described Albert as a good parent and a nice man who did not seem prone to violence, making the discovery of Mary's remains more than 50 years later all the more perplexing. With no other information to go on, investigators closed the case, leaving those who knew the couple to speculate about what might have happened. In Rocco's opinion, it could have been an argument that went too far and escalated into physical violence. But the unfortunate truth is that nobody will ever know what Mary's last moments entailed or what led to her death. Number 2. Carlos Delon. In November 2023, Los Angeles officials announced that they had found the remains of a missing Guatemalan national in the backyard of a residence in the city's North Hills neighborhood. The discovery of 35-year-old Carlos Delon's body came after law enforcement received a tip that he was dead and the address where he was buried. According to an LAPD spokesperson, responding officers removed a structure from the backyard and a concrete foundation beneath it in order to get to Delon's remains. He had last been heard from 5 months earlier, in June of 2023. After excavating his body, authorities charged a person living at the property, 48-year-old Russell Robinson, with Delon's murder. It's unclear what led to the killing, but police believe Robinson is responsible for the victim's death. He remains held without bail while awaiting the next steps in his case.
And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content.
Number 1. Sandra Steen. During a routine backyard landscaping job in Monterey, California in 2015, a worker dug up a plastic bag with a round object inside. Upon taking a closer look, he immediately realized it was a human skull. The landscaping team called the police, who proceeded to uncover the remainder of a skeleton belonging to a woman who had been buried face down next to a fence with a garbage bag over her head and torso. Based on the appearance of the bones, the woman's cause of death was unclear. The homeowners claimed to know nothing of her death or the presence of human remains in their yard, suggesting the victim had been there since before they bought the property in 1998. Her body had decomposed, but her dress was still intact, along with a purse containing jewelry, makeup, a calendar from 1982, and a faded photograph of an African-American woman. With no driver's license or other identifying documents present at the burial site, investigators hoped the photo would help them identify the remains. They hit an unexpected stroke of luck when they found a missing persons report for a 32-year-old mother of 3 named Sandra Steen, who vanished in December 1982 and looked strikingly similar to the woman in the photograph that was found with their Jane Doe. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Sandra, which meant that the next task was to find out what happened to her, why, and who was responsible for it. Sandra had previously been married to a military man named Patrick, whom she met while he was stationed at nearby Fort Ord. The couple divorced in 1976, 8 years before Sandra's disappearance, and maintained friendly ties for the sake of their children. When Sandra vanished, the kids were living with their dad, but kept in touch regularly with their mother, whose family filed a missing persons report soon after they stopped hearing from her. Sandra's 2 roommates told police they had last seen her as she was leaving the house to go out dancing. As Christmas and birthdays came and went, her loved ones knew something terrible must have happened to her, but they went without answers until the discovery of her body more than 30 years later. At the time of Sandra's death, a man named Alfred Powell had been living in the home where her remains were eventually found. Powell had been convicted of murdering 30-year-old Suzanne K. Nixon, whose body was found in the garage in 1983, and was serving a life sentence when he was charged with Sandra's murder in 2015. He pleaded guilty to the charge and received a sentence of 15 years to life. Between both murder sentences, he will remain in prison for the rest of his natural life, ensuring that he will never again be free to hurt an innocent person.
Number 10. Tyler Hadley's party. Tyler Hadley had been talking about murdering his parents since he was a young boy. His parents weren't bad people. Tyler just had something unusual going on in his mind. As he grew older, he continued to fantasize about the ways in which he could dispose of his pesky parental figures. And in the weeks leading up to him actually doing it, he confided in his friends how it would go down. He told his pals that he was going to kill them, and then throw a big party afterward. On the evening of July 16, 2011, Tyler swallowed 3 ecstasy pills and attacked his mother with the blunt end of a claw hammer. He then turned on his father when he rushed into the room and tried to help. Tyler beat Mary Jo Hadley and Blake Hadley to death with that hammer, dragged their bodies up into their bedroom, cleaned the blood from the downstairs, and then threw a party. About 60 people showed up. There was drugs and booze, and it was a total rager. But about halfway through the party, Tyler started telling people that his parents were dead upstairs, and his party guests left. Even his best friend, Michael Mandel, fled the party and called a crime hotline to report the murders. By the next morning, Tyler Hadley was in custody. Because Tyler was only 17, he wasn't able to be sentenced to death in Florida. But he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. And in 2015, the house where Tyler had thrown his party was demolished. Number 9. Nina Silva. Nina Silva was standing in an alley outside a house where a big party was going on when a bullet from a drive-by shooting killed her. She and 3 others were struck by bullets at the house party in La Jolla in early July of 2019. The other 3 survived, though they suffered major injuries. One victim was even shot in the jaw and will likely be disfigured for the rest of their life. According to the prosecutors in the case, the party was only meant to be a small gathering of friends. But it drew some uninvited guests, who invited more uninvited guests, and it turned into a nightmare. And that was when Odyssey Carrillo Sellers, 18 years old, drove past the house and fired a volley of rounds into a crowd at approximately 12:30 a.m. Odyssey was apprehended some days later following a high-speed police chase. Nina was only 6 days away from massively changing her life when she went to that party. The 20-year-old woman had been planning to move to New York for a better future. The arrangements were made, everything was ready, and then she went to a house party to say goodbye to her friends. She had no idea it would be the last thing she ever did, as she became the victim of indiscriminate violence. Number 8. Screwdriver Birthday. On March 21, 2021, Australian teenager Jason Langens attended his friend's 16th birthday party. It was a house party, but not too wild of an affair, just some friends hanging out and drinking. Jason, who was 17, found himself in the middle of a violent altercation between the party guests and 3 males nobody there knew who had come to crash the party. These party crashers arrived just as the festivities were winding down and had gone to that house with no other intention but to cause problems. When Jason put himself in the middle of the action, he wound up getting beaten. He was hit over the head twice and then stabbed with a screwdriver. 3 weeks later, after what must have felt like endless suffering, Jason succumbed to his injuries and died in the hospital. His family made the heart-wrenching decision to turn his life support off and allow their child to rest. Shortly after that, homicide detectives tracked down the young man responsible for the murder. He hasn't been named because of his age, but he and his 2 pals have been apprehended by the police and should be being brought up on charges soon. Jason was described by his mother, who desperately fought back tears in front of reporters, as a beautiful boy. A boy who had been ripped from their lives too soon, leaving a big hole in his family's heart. Number 7. Deadly Pittsburgh House Party. Early in the morning on April 17, 2022, gunfire erupted at a house in Pittsburgh. 2 young people were killed, 8 others were injured, and most of the rest ran screaming into the night, afraid for their lives. According to the Pittsburgh police, the party was happening inside an Airbnb rental. Undoubtedly, whoever was renting the place had no idea there were over 200 underage kids inside their house, drinking themselves into a riot. It's not clear exactly what started the shooting, but police do say over 50 rounds were fired inside the house. Pistols and casings from rifles were found at the scene, and the evidence outside stretched across several different blocks. According to eyewitness George Stevens, who was smoking a cigarette outside a bar next to the rental property when the shooting broke out, he at first thought there were fireworks. Then he saw kids scrambling out of the house like rats running from a burning building. We don't know who the shooter was, and the police have yet to make any arrests. They apparently have some suspects, but that was the last update we got back in April. Number 6. Trashing the place. A gang of brazen teenagers broke into a house worth $8 million in Florida, and threw such a crazy house party, somebody could make a movie about it. These teens were so confident that they could get away with throwing the biggest party of the century that they posted flyers around Santa Rosa Beach. They even advertised the shindig on social media. Of course, the owners of the house weren't home when the party happened. In fact, the house is owned by extremely wealthy people and only used as a vacation property. Hundreds of teenagers couldn't have cared less about the owners when they broke in, trashed the place, and left it in utter disrepair. According to Corey Dobridnia with the Walton County Sheriff's Office, they arrived early on Saturday morning after neighbors called to complain about the noise. When they arrived, they found about 200 kids drunk and disorderly in the house. In Florida, it's illegal to throw what's called an open house party, meaning a huge party inside a residence. It's also illegal to break into a house. That's called burglary, and so everyone in the home was immediately guilty of 2 crimes. Even if the police don't want to charge 200 kids as criminals, the owners of the house have been extremely pushy with ensuring every last attendee of that party is charged with all possible crimes. The police are now going so far as to subpoena Snapchat conversations just to make sure all the kids who partied that night get in trouble. Number 5. James McGrath's murder. James McGrath, a teenager from Connecticut, was killed following a brawl at a house party in May of 2022. James and 3 others got stabbed by a maniac with a knife at what the police described as an alcohol-fueled house party. James was only 17, a junior at Fairfield College Preparatory School. He was a lacrosse player and had a bright future ahead of him, but something went wrong that night amongst the drunken teens, and a total of 4 victims ended up stabbed and sent to the hospital. James was the only one who lost his life. A teen from Milford named Raul Elia Val has been charged with murder and first-degree assault. The police learned that minor conflicts between the rival schools led to the fight breaking out at the party. It had started earlier at a different house party, with kids from James's school crashing the scene. After they left, kids from the first party followed them to the second party, and what followed was a group brawl. About 25 teenagers were fighting outside the house in a giant pile of sweaty bodies and swinging fists. And that was when Raul Val pulled out a pocket knife and stabbed James in the chest. Number 4. Home Alone. In 2010, a Facebook post about a party resulted in roughly 100 teenagers showing up uninvited to a house. The Abbott family's home in Massachusetts quickly turned into an underage rave. The family had taken a trip to Paris and left Alex, their 18-year-old son, in charge. Alex posted the details about the party on Facebook, and that was when the hordes of guests started flooding in. The amount of damage done to the home quickly amounted to about $45,000. The doors were smashed apart and ripped off the hinges, the windows were shattered, the floors were ruined, holes were punched in just about every wall, and the carpets in their house were soaked in urine and blood. It was as if Alex had let a wild troop of monkeys into his house. Anything of value was stolen, and the teenagers even peed in all the drawers and on Alex's parents' clothing. 4 teenagers were arrested by the police, and the rest got away with enjoying the party of their teenage lives. They even bragged about it on Facebook after, calling themselves the Home Wrecker Crew. Number 3. Madagascar House Fire. A house party in Madagascar turned into a scene of horror when their house caught on fire and the flames trapped everyone inside. According to the local reports, the party began as an innocent gathering of about 40 people. But then, halfway through the night, the embers of the fire, which had been used to cook food for the partygoers, somehow sparked back to life and started a fire. Within minutes, the fire had spread through the entire house. Flames took over the top floor, caused the roof to cave in, and 39 people were killed. Every last partygoer ended up eaten by the flames, including 17 children. The only person who escaped the disaster was a 14-year-old boy who jumped out the window, only to die later at the hospital from injuries he sustained during the fall. Fire crews in the village of Ambalavato said nobody could leave through the front door because they were all panicking trying to get out. They only managed to crush each other against the only exit. Panic and hysteria trapped them inside, and soon the roof came down on their heads. Number 2. Bad Breakup. On July 30th, 2016, students from the University of Washington hosted a house party in the small community of Mukilteo. That's in a suburb of Everett, Washington. About 20 university students were in attendance, including Alan Christopher Ivanov. At first, Alan appeared to be just an ordinary guest. He arrived at about 10 o'clock and wandered about the party. After a little while, he retrieved a rifle, crept to the side of the house, and hid beside a wall. His hiding place was discovered by a young man named Jacob Long, whom Alan immediately shot dead. Since the jig was up, Alan got to his feet and started shooting. He hit Will Kramer, who managed to escape by crawling away through the bushes. Then Alan shot Jordan Ebner outside before making his way into the house. Alan moved through the patio doors, found his primary target, and shot her multiple times at point-blank range. Some of these shots hit Anna Bui in the face, blowing her skull into fragments. Next, Alan moved upstairs and shot at 2 men he found. Each managed to escape alive. At this point, Alan realized he was out of ammunition and fled. He was discovered 90 minutes later by state troopers over 100 miles, 161 kilometers away. Alan was motivated to commit this unspeakable act of terror because of a breakup that had just gone down between him and one of his victims, Anna Bui. He was furious because after the breakup, she moved along in her life and he was still stuck by himself with no new girlfriend. This made him so angry that he went and purchased a rifle a week before the party, bought a second magazine the day before, and even read the rifle's manual to make sure he could use it properly. Alan Ivanov was given life in prison without the possibility of parole and is still locked up at Stafford Creek Corrections Center. Number 1. Police Settlement. Deja Hurd rented an Airbnb property to celebrate her 21st birthday with her friends in Cartersville, Georgia. It was the last night of 2017, and about 65 young people showed up to do some serious celebrating. But the night ended with 65 partygoers in handcuffs, even though according to prosecutors, only one of them broke any laws. In fact, more police broke the law that night than the people they arrested. Somebody complained about a loud party, and this prompted the Cartersville police to go investigate. They entered the home illegally without a warrant, searched dozens of people, and found a single ounce of marijuana ditched on the ground outside. Since nobody would claim it, the police decided they would arrest them all and charge each person with possession of a small amount of marijuana. In other words, split the ounce into 65 separate charges. This proved to be the wrong move on the part of the cops, since they've been sued for making wrongful arrests. The police now have to pay $1 million split among the people they wrongfully put in handcuffs. Especially since they didn't just put these people in handcuffs. One of the partygoers said they were locked in wrist and ankle restraints, then carted away to the jail like they were animals, even though they hadn't done anything illegal.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather find a human skeleton in your backyard or have half your backyard swallowed by a sinkhole? Let us know in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you soon.